Today we're talking about 8th grade, Chapter 3, Lesson 5, Direct Variation. And a direct variation is a linear relationship in which the ratio of y to x is a constant, which we use m to represent the constant. So the formula is usually y equals m times x. So y equals some number times x. M is the constant of proportionality. It looks like a proportion. Or we call it constant ratio, or we call it constant variation. But it's represented by the letter M. Sometimes we also call this the slope. Most often we call it the slope. So example 1, the cost of a private gymnastic lesson, Y, varies directly with the number of sessions, X, as shown in the graph. Write a direct variation equation, identifying the constant of variation and interpret its meaning. So let's find the constant variation or the slope. To write a slope variation, we're going to find the change or rise, change of y over the change of x. And sometimes they call this rise over run. They've picked 2 dots on the graph for you, and we're going to figure out how much did it rise to get to that dot. So the rise is the up and down, and it's counting by 5, so it went up 10. And you can do this by either subtracting 20 minus 10 or just looking at the graph. And then we want to find out how much did the y change. How much did the x change? So I'm going from that dot over to the other one. If I go over, that's 1. And again, you can do this by subtracting or just counting the lines. And the change is 10 over 1, which comes to just 10. So my m is going to equal 10. M equals 10. Now we're going to put that in the formula. Y equals 10 times x. Now I can put in any x and figure out what y is. So if I put in 4, it would be 10 times 4, which is 40. And if you look at the graph, if I pick 4, I do end up on 40. Let's try example 2. A 3-year-old cat is often considered to be 15 in human years. Assume that the equivalent age is in human years, y, varies directly with its age as a cat. Write and solve a direct variation equation to determine the human years age of a cat that is 6 years old. So we're going to write a direct variation equation letting x represent the cat's actual age and let y represent the human equivalent. So it's going to be in this form right here, y equals mx. In the problem, it talked about 15 being the human years, and we said we're going to let that be the y. So where the y is, I'm plugging in 15. And right now we don't know the m, but we know the x represents the actual age, which was 3. We want to isolate the variable. To do that, we do the opposite of the operation. So this was multiplication. I'm going to divide. If I divide by 3 on both sides, then my m will be alone. 15 divided by 3 makes 5. And 3 divided by 3 makes 1, and 1m is the same as just m. So the direct variation equation is going to be y equals 5 times x, because I'm plugging in the 5 where the m was. So to determine the human age, when the cat is 6 years old, I'm going to replace x with 6. So y equals 5, not times x, but times 6. And 5 times 6 would make 30. So the cat will be 30 human years when he's 6. So finding the constant of proportionality, or the constant variation, or the slope is all the same as finding the constant rate. And to do that, we always find the change of y over the change of x. And you can do it like that. Like, what's the difference between 4 and 2? We're adding 2 every time. On the bottom, we're adding 10 every time. So the y's are changing by 10, and the x's are changing by 2. And then if we simplify that, 10 divided by 2 makes 5. So the constant of proportionality, m, equals 5. And do the same thing on number 2. On 3 and 4, they've given you some information, and you're going to figure out what the m is. So we start by plugging in what they give us into the formula. If y is 8, and we don't know m, and x is 3. We want to get the m alone to figure out what m is. So I divide by 3 on both sides. And I can leave that like a fraction. 8/3 equals m. Then I'm going to plug in that number again into the formula. 8 over 3 times the x that they give me. And that's going to equal y. To multiply fractions, I'm going to need to put a 1 under him. And then I can simplify. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 45 divided by 3 makes 15. Then goes straight across. 8 times 15. $120. 1 times 1 is 1, which is the same as 120. So y equals 120. If x is 45, y equals 120. And you do the same thing for number 3. And there will be a test question like these.